You've joined Prophecy Talk for analysis of world events and unfolding Bible prophecy, brought to light by prophecy expert and author Erika Grey of www.erikagray.com.
2017 was an eventful year in Bible prophecy news, and it was marked by key events. Here is the year's recap, broken up by category of areas of watch in Bible prophecy. The United States in Bible prophecy. 2017 marked the early days of the Trump presidency, and early on he embraced the far right within the European Union. This would have an impact on the revived Roman Empire in 2017. Anti-EU Ted Malloch, who was reported to be appointed as Donald Trump's EU ambassador, and he was making waves by stating that he helped take down one union and it was time to help bring down another one, referring to the EU. He erroneously predicted the end of the EU and Euro. Donald Trump went and met EU leaders, and the Trump-Macron handshake dominated the news when Macron gripped Trump's hand in an iron grip. Trump demanded countries pay their fair share in NATO and pulled out of the climate agreement. Vice President Mogherini, in response, called the EU the only credible global power. The U.S. sanctioned Russia for meddling in its affairs, which was never proven, and the House and Senate tied Trump's hands by a bill that would stop him from normalizing relations with Russia. In response to more sanctions, Russia promised it would take aim at the U.S. dollar and both cut their diplomatic staff at embassies. Germany and the EU Commission president voiced their being against those sanctions, which also would hurt EU interests. China also knocked out the petrodollar by trading oil in yuans. While most Americans were not paying attention, the dollar's status as the world's reserve currency is being further whittled away, and this time in response to its own reckless policies. Israel in Bible prophecy. Israel, the center of all Bible prophecy, by divine providence, came to the center of world affairs in 2017. The U.S. pulled out of the UN's anti-Israel UNESCO, but even greater than that decision, U.S. President Donald Trump made an unprecedented move by recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital and stating that the embassy in Tel Aviv would be moved. This created a firestorm. The EU followed by saying it might recognize Jerusalem for both Israel and the Palestinians. This move, which went against public opinion and the world consensus of a two-state solution, would pave the way for the future treaty that begins the tribulation, which will guarantee Israel's peace and also for the building of the third temple. The year ended with the U.S. receiving both condemnation and a vote against by the UN, both which were rebuffed by the U.S. The EU in Bible prophecy, the revived Roman Empire. EU Council President Donald Tusk announced Donald Trump as a threat to the EU bloc, and this would affect its move forward in 2017. The Eurozone economy, to everyone's surprise, outshined the United States. Brexit talks formally began. March 24th was the 60th anniversary of the Treaty of Rome, where EU leaders committed to greater union. During a forum on that day titled Europe Fights Back, EU Elmar Brok, MEP and chairman of the European Parliament Committee on Foreign Affairs, during his speech stated that Putin, Trump, Wilders, and Le Pen were the founders of the new Europe. 1 year after Brexit, EU Vice President Federica Mogherini announced concerning an EU army that it was now time to get things done. She stated that EU citizens want an EU army and affirmed that the EU was now beyond collapse. She announced that the EU now had its first command center, and it came together in record speed. EU leaders hailed the historic step in defense cooperation, with France and Germany making joint proposals for the future of Europe, but making defense the #1 priority. The EU continued to show its strength when the European Commission approved the bailout of the Monte dei Paschi bank, whose failings dominated the news a year earlier. In EU elections in 2017, EU Parliament President Martin Schulz left the EU Parliament to run against Angela Merkel in the German elections. Euro-federalist Macron won the French elections, and soon the French papers were comparing Macron to the Roman god Jupiter. At Macron's inauguration, he had the EU anthem played, and especially one on a pro-EU platform. Angela Merkel followed his path and also considered EU reforms for a U.S. of Europe. Merkel won the German elections. And while the U.S. was talking bilateral trade deals with the EU signed an historic trade deal with Japan. In Brexit, the process began for the moving of the EU agencies such as the European Banking Authority and the European Medicines Agency and more, costing London 48,000 jobs. As North Korea now threatened to wipe the U.S. off the face of the earth, EU think tanks began to discuss a nuclear weapons program. Confidence in the European Union was growing. The EU then took a historic step, which they stated was a bad day for their enemies, and signed a joint agreement for their defense and called for greater defense buildup. On November 13th, 23 EU countries signed a collective defense treaty, essentially launching an EU army. Meanwhile, the EU economy performed better than expected, and Brussels reunited all religious groups. The new-found army might conduct its first mission. 10-nation division of revived Roman Empire. During the 60th anniversary of the Treaty of Rome, the EU committed to a multi-speed Europe, also known as a two-speed Europe. In September, on the EU front, French President Emmanuel Macron called for a multi-speed Europe. This is another term for nations going ahead of the others in core areas to help move the EU forward, and which matches perfectly the 10-king division we see in its final form depicted in the books of Daniel and the Revelation. Whore of Babylon in revived Roman Empire. On the eve of the anniversary of the Treaty of Rome, Pope Francis met with EU leaders at the Vatican and supported a federal union of the European Union, which means a union along the lines of the United States. He also spoke out endorsing climate change as man-made. Pope Francis stated that the climate change deniers will be judged. The Pope also spoke in favor of a two-state solution for Israel. His policies essentially endorse a liberal EU empire. Pope Francis also changed a line in the Lord's Prayer given by Jesus. Nation rising against nation, signs of the end times. North Korea raised its feathers against the United States and threatened to fire a nuke for Donald Trump's inauguration. The conflict between the U.S. and North Korea escalated, and China and Russia sent ships to the region with the threat of nuclear war looming. Russian bombers flew close to Alaska, and China put its bombers on alert. North Korea fires its first intercontinental ballistic missile, a missile that could reach Alaska. Hawaii residents were told to prepare for nuclear attack. In July, North Korea tested another missile and boasted that a missile was now in range of the United States. The threats from North Korea to the U.S. continued to heighten. Japan announced that the North Korea threat is critical and imminent. North Korea launched another missile test and this time announced it could reach all of the U.S. mainland. An expert stated that North Korea's latest missile is unstoppable, and North Korea warned that nuclear war was close. Escalation of violence, as were the days of Noah, signs of the end times. Meanwhile, terrorist attacks escalated. 2017 would be marked by the far-right rally in Virginia and the rise of the radical left, Antifa. The driver who drove into a crowd at Times Square, the Manchester concert bombing, the London stabbing and vehicle attacks, G20 protesters protest for the sake of protesting. The UK raised its terror threat level to imminent. Sweden, which was one of the world's safest countries, is now quite dangerous. In October, the deadliest shooting took place in U.S. history in Las Vegas, killing 50 and injuring 515 people. In November, the Texas church shooting, which left 26 dead, would be called the worst in the state's history. Along with the increased violence in society are reports of unspeakable animal cruelty. Sadly, a bull actually committed suicide after a man set its horns on fire. Signs in weather and nature, signs of the end times. As more record-breaking flooding occurred in rivers, U.S. Glacier National Park lost more glaciers with just 26 remaining of 150. Shocking Gulf-sized hail slammed Istanbul, and storms triggered major flooding. Mysterious craters appeared in Russia. Unprecedented fires burned in Iceland. Hurricane Harvey hit Texas with record flooding. Hurricane Irma was so powerful it measured on devices used to measure earthquakes and turned the Caribbean into piles of rubble. On top of Irma, Katia became the third hurricane to threaten the U.S. in 6 days. On top of Katia came Hurricane Jose, which strengthened to a Category 4. Irma caused historic flooding in Jacksonville, with residents told to get out now. A report was issued that there are now 400 extreme weather events every year, 4 times as many as 1970. In 1 week in 2017, extreme weather was occurring literally around the globe. Mexico got hit by an 8.2 earthquake, the strongest to hit in a century, and it triggered a tsunami. That month, as this was reported, the Mexican earthquake triggered mysterious bright lights that flashed across the country. Cat 5 Hurricane Maria did mind-boggling damage to Dominica, its leader stated. From Dominica, Hurricane Maria slammed Puerto Rico with a force never seen in history, leaving the entire island without power. One of the worst natural disasters in California history raged, the California fires. Scarlet fever baffled scientists as it went on the rise. Super malaria spread in Southeast Asia, and Spanish honey production dropped. As was the days of Lot, escalation of sexual and other sin, signs of the end times. Sex change operations hit a new level, with a mother and son becoming father and daughter. Signs of the times continued with a Santa Cruz brain surgeon, the next to be labeled a child rapist, and Australian police charge a Vatican cardinal with sex offense. Vatican cops busted a drug-fueled gay orgy at a cardinal's apartment. Migrant sex crimes soared in Germany. A 90,000-strong porn ring was busted on the dark web. The U.S. charged 412 in health fraud schemes. Australia reported forced migration of children to Australia, a bigger sex abuse scandal than Jimmy Savile. An Ohio factory owner reported having many jobs but few sober applicants. A California state prosecutor was charged with child pornography. In Norwalk, Connecticut, the feds indicted doctors on selling drugs. In response to the world's wickedness was a week of extreme weather around the globe. Extreme weather gave rise to fraud during Hurricane Katrina and other scams. Scotland's drug deaths hit the highest in the EU. 2017 saw the increase of suicides. 2017 also became the year of the abomination of basic income defying biblical principles of work being tried, including within the United States. And in July, we saw universal basic income tried in Finland. In December, Canada began paying its citizens basic income. Ezekiel 38 war. In August, we saw hundreds of Russian combat troops posted at Quinitria across from the Golan. Russia, Turkey, and Iran unite to help end Syrian war, which is a prelude to the Ezekiel 38 prophecy. Technology, mark of the beast. We also saw companies begin to microchip employees, as happened in the U.S. at a Wisconsin firm, and in companies in Europe trying other variations. In the area of technology, 2017 became the year of gene editing, with human embryos edited for the first time. A Chinese team announced its first DNA editing intervention. On the technology front, facial recognition gained ground in Europe. On the technology front came the Holy Grail microchip that might surpass the power of the human brain, and also in 2017 came the announcement of neural lace for brain technology. In September, Vladimir Putin came out and stated that the country that perfects AI will be the ruler of the world. There was also major developments in robotics with the appearance of Sophie, who was made a citizen of Saudi Arabia, and the more advanced worm robot that can squeeze into small holes and turn corners. Another major technological development was that the first church of AI was officially formed, which might give rise to the false prophet. Big blow to the Islamic Caliphate as beast of revelation. 2017 also became the year that the Islamic beast of revelation theory was proven false, with news of ISIS's caliphate crumbled as its foreign fighters fled. 2017 was an eventful year in end-time Bible prophecy, and we can expect to see more events in 2018 as we draw closer to the rapture and the start of the tribulation.